What can the Bucks actually do this offseason? Who are their key free agents? And what do the Bucks need in terms of player acquisitions? Camille and I break down all of those questions next on Locked On Bucks.
You are Locked On Bucks, your daily Milwaukee Bucks podcast, part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day.
Welcome into Locked On Bucks. I'm Justin Garcia, joined as always by Camille Davis. We thank you for making this your first listen of the day. To all the everydayers out there, we've heard you through the comments, and we are getting through this long off season for a third consecutive year together. Today's episode is brought to you by Game Time. Download the Game Time app, create an account, and use the code LOCKEDONNBA for $20 off your first purchase. Camille, we've talked a lot about what the Bucks do. Like, number one, hope Giannis stays. And then from there, it's easier to get guys like a Gary Trent Jr. To reinvest and say, all right, I'll stick around. Bobby Portis, too, in that category. But we figured for today's show, and we will get into this in much greater detail with Frank Madden in the coming days here, but we figured we would just table set and go over, here's what the Bucks have, here's what their roster looks like, and here's what changed in February 6th with that deal that brought them under the second apron. Because as I have said a couple of times already, if that trade does not happen, then it is time to maybe start holding a vigil and saying, I think it's over with this group. So it put you in a better spot, not a good spot, but a better spot. So let's start with the players under contract.
Okay.
You mentioned this before we started recording, but for those uninitiated, how many players do the Bucks have on a guaranteed contract right now next season?
You can count them up on one hand, ladies and gentlemen. That's 1, 2, 3, 4. 4 guaranteed contracts on the Bucks for the Bucks heading into next offseason. And those 4 players take up 86% of the available cap space for the Bucks there before you start hitting, luxury tax, first apron, second apron, so on and so forth. So yeah, 4 players under guaranteed contract for the Bucks next season.
And one of those we assume is not going to play next season, which to say makes it even more difficult is putting it mildly when we talk about rounding out your roster and putting yourself in a competitive space with those teams that we've talked about that have bounced you in the first round of the playoffs in 2 consecutive years in the case of the Indiana Pacers. So, I mean, obviously the big ones are Giannis and Damian Lillard. Is that duo alone is going to make up $109 million basically of your salary cap. And I think it's 154 million is the cap number. Obviously you can, and the Bucks have gone over the salary cap, but you've got Giannis and Dame both making $54.1 million. Kyle Kuzma making $21.4 million. And I'm sure there's a lot of people that were listening to this, Camille, and thinking, Giannis, Dame, who are the other two? Kuzma and Tyler Smith is the 4th guaranteed contract at $1.9 million that the Bucks have. So breaking it down into all the buckets that we can view these players. One restricted free agent. That is Ryan Rollins. I'm not even going to venture to guess on, hey, Ryan Rollins wants to be here. Or Ryan Rollins is looking for something else, or the Bucks are looking for something else. But I think you feel pretty good about your chances to retain Ryan Rollins. And especially with Dame's injury, there is certainly much more of an impetus to keep him around. So that is your one restricted free agent. And as we have seen through the years, restricted free agency, you seldom see players move teams, especially a player the level of Ryan Rollins. I mean, we all experienced the Malcolm Brogdon situation, and revisiting what the Bucks got in terms of proper assets in that's a different conversation. But it's not common to see that. So that's your one restricted free agent. You have 3 players that have non-guaranteed deals. I would guess 2 of those for sure are going to be guaranteed. AJ Green, and it's $2.3 million. And you can also extend AJ Green this summer. Andre Jackson Jr., $2.2 million. Same story, I believe, for Ajax, that you can extend him. And then Chris Livingston, that's the interesting one. That's the guy that I know we adopted as our own last summer and never really came to fruition. And I'm quite frankly not sure what the future holds there for Chris Livingston, but he's the third of your non-guaranteed deals at $2.2 million.
Well, let me ask you this too with Chris Livingston, thinking about that, with him having a non-guaranteed contract going into this upcoming season, given what his cap number is looking like if they were to guarantee the contract for the next year, which is a little bit over 2.2 million, do you think it would make just sense for the Bucks to to pick up that contract, even though we didn't see much of him on the court this year? I know there was
just to have a body at that price,
and also contract on the record.
Yeah. And I mean, the whole conspiracy theory over, well, how did he end up on the team and who's his agent? That there's that you take into account as well. Then you have three players with a player option. Bobby Portis at $13.4 million. I don't think he's picking up that option. I think Bobby Portis is going to decline that option. I think there's more money on the market, and hopefully that money comes from the Bucks and you can work out some type of an extension with Bobby Portis, but he has a player option. Pat Connaughton has a player option for $9.4 million. When we say the Bucks have 4 contracts on the books, Camille, I'm going to say the Bucks unofficially have 5 on the books because I think we'll all but guarantee Pat Connaughton is picking up that $9.4 million option. And then Kevin Porter Jr. at $2.5 million. I would assume,
that's a tricky one.
Yeah, I would lean towards he declines and gets a multi-year deal, but you don't know. I mean, the money wasn't out there for KPJ last summer. The Bucks, I do know, had him in for a workout and had a lot of interest in him last summer. I'm not saying he's going to definitely re-sign with the team because they showed that they wanted him and everything that we heard, but this wasn't just a trade deadline thing. This was John Horst putting in the work over the summer as well. And, we said at the time of late March, if Kevin Porter Jr. earns a significant amount of money, it's a good thing because it means he had a pretty incredible playoff run for the Bucks. I don't think that's what we saw, right? I don't think he was bad. I don't think he was to the level that you hear a lot of Bucks fans speak of. So I don't think it's a mid-level exception that KPJ is
not a full one.
No.
Yeah, not a full one. Definitely maybe breaking that up and giving him a piece of that for sure. But for Kevin Porter Jr., what we saw in the regular season from him, again, I was surprised at just how productive he was in a Milwaukee Bucks jersey. And then come playoff time, he had a lot on his shoulders with Dame's injury, his first time in the postseason. And the early results didn't look good for Kevin Porter Jr. He did not play well early on, but did play a bit better as the series went on. And again, the potential of what he can be as a shot creator, as someone who has developed chemistry with Giannis. I think he is someone, as mentioned, that the Bucks should try to bring back next season. Now, what that price tag is going to be an interesting one because I don't think he's played himself into, a $10 million type of contract annually, but part of the mid-level exemption, like I can see him being, maybe $6 million, maybe $7 million a year, somewhere in that range to bring him back. And you could do that if you break up that MLE to kind of get him back on the team.
The Malik Beasley figure, basically.
Pretty much,
I could see something around that. So it leaves us then with the group that are unrestricted free agents. And this is where some of the more interesting conversations will take place for the Bucks. So we'll run through that list, our thoughts on, look, in a perfect world, what happens with this foursome here, and then start to take a look ahead to what chips do the Bucks have? What cards do they have to play this summer? We'll get into that conversation coming up next on Locked On Bucks. Scaling your business requires the right expertise at the right time. With Upwork, you can find specialized freelancers in marketing, development, design, and more. Experts ready to help you take your business to the next level. Upwork gives businesses flexibility by connecting them with top freelance talent across multiple industries, including IT, AI, web development, and marketing. Whether you need extra hands for a project or a long-term partner, Upwork makes hiring simple and affordable. If you need help with a marketing campaign, Upwork can connect you with a freelance expert who delivers incredible results. Posting a job is free and simple, and within a day, multiple qualified candidates are out there to choose from. Instead of hiring full-time, Upwork helps you find affordable, top-tier freelancers to scale your business efficiently. Visit Upwork.com right now and post your job for free. That is Upwork.com, Upwork.com to connect with top talent and grow your business today. There's nothing like the atmosphere of NBA playoff games. Every bucket, every defensive stop, every moment feels huge. It's electric in the arena, and with Game Time, you can be a part of it without the stress of last-minute ticket hunting. Game Time makes it fast and easy to get playoff tickets, even when demand is sky high. Prices on the app actually go down as tip-off gets closer, and their last-minute deals can save you up to 60%. They got all-in pricing, meaning you see the exact price you are going to pay with no surprise fees and sticker shock once you get to checkout. What you see is what you pay, and you can find these seats for any live event, last-minute sports, concerts, comedy, theater, and more. You name it, it's all out there on Game Time. So take the guesswork out of buying tickets with Game Time. Download the Game Time app, create an account, and use the code LOCKEDONNBA for $20 off your first purchase. Terms apply. Again, create an account and redeem that code LOCKEDONNBA for $20 off. Download Game Time today. Last-minute tickets, lowest prices guaranteed. So the remaining 4 players then, Camille, that the Bucks have who are unrestricted free agents: Taurean Prince, Gary Trent Jr., Jericho Sims, and Brook Lopez. Again, all of this hinges on Giannis and what happens there. And I even hesitate to say that because it's Giannis is under contract, so we should operate with the assumption Giannis is on the Bucks. But this prevailing fear that, oh, what if Giannis asks for a trade? That's what's looming over all.
Because that'll affect free agency big time.
It affects who wants to stay here. It affects who can you bring in for a veteran minimum and things like that. Sure. Let's assume this roster stays, the big guy stays status quo here. How many of those 4 guys are back in that situation?
I think 2 of those 4. I think 2 of the 4 come back, and might surprise some of the everydayers given the Brook Lopez conversations we've been having on Locked On Bucks about his value to this team. But I would assume, if I had to say, I said 2 of the 4, the 2 I'm picking out of that foursome is Gary Trent Jr. and Jericho Sims. Now, the Brook Lopez piece is interesting because I think depending on the number, there could be some appetite of bringing Brook Lopez back, but I also don't know if Brook Lopez is somebody who, after the time served here in Milwaukee, is like, yeah, I'll sign for the vet man or something like that. Because I do think that there'll be other teams this free agency who are like, he could be a useful piece for us here and might offer him more money than the Bucks would if they are looking for Brook Lopez to take somewhat of a discount to come back to Milwaukee this upcoming season.
I had those 2 guys as well. And again, I'm sure there will be a lot. Oh, but you told us this about Brook Lopez. I still think he can be an effective player. I think the big thing is the minutes played and the situation that he's in. And the Bucks just, as the years went on, they did not have that situation for him. It deteriorated on the perimeter and the individual defenders that were out there with Brook. And that's what's so vital, to have that support around him. So I don't think there's an easy path to get there with this group. And I think you've seen the last 8 games of the regular season and the successful lineups in the postseason, how the Bucks have to play. And that is with Giannis or a Bobby Portis type playing at the 5 alongside Giannis. So yeah, those would be the 2 that I go to as well. And, you know, I'm curious to see what the market is for Gary Trent Jr. The one thing, and I think Frank and I talked about this last year after the Trent signing, or midway through the season, actually, when people are already thinking about how do you retain this guy. The Bucks can offer him 120% raise. or they can break up the non-taxpayer mid-level exception and use that to pay Gary Trent Jr., to pay Kevin Porter Jr. That figure, so let's just kind of marry all this together. So they are projected to have that non-taxpayer mid-level exception, which they can split among multiple players. That is $14.1 million. So you could say we're going to give Gary Trent Jr. 7. We're going to give Kevin Porter Jr. 7. You could even use not all of it and say, well, we're going to use this part that we're going to pay Gary Trent Jr. 6. We're going to pay Kevin Porter Jr. 5. And maybe something else opens up that we can use that for another guy to pay him slightly more than the veteran minimum. I know you can also use that for trades if you got, let's say, Kevin Porter Jr. opts in to that final year and you do coerce Gary Trent Jr. into signing for the 120% raise. You could keep that full non-taxpayer mid-level and use that as basically a trade exception and acquire a player into that trade during the season. There's the $5.1 million biannual exception as well. You can only use that, though, if you don't use cap room to sign any players. And if you do use that, I believe that hard caps you. Yeah, at the first apron. So that's, I think, the most realistic outcome here is you pay Gary Trent Jr. using part of that non-taxpayer mid-level. As we said, I'm really not sure what happens with Kevin Porter Jr. in terms of if he picks up the option and you say, we'll take care of you next summer, or if he opts out and you use the other part of that taxpayer for him. I do feel like when you ask me, if you ask me who of that group is most likely to be back with the Bucks next season, if we look at the player options piece, actually, let's just look at all of it. So I'm taking out the non-guaranteed because, again, they can retain those guys easily. They will retain 2 of those guys. I still think Ryan Rollins will be here. So if we look at those other 7 guys, the Taurean Prince, Brook Lopez, Gary Trent Jr., Jericho Sims, and then the 3 player options with Bobby, Pat, and Kevin Porter Jr., I think the guys I feel most confident will be back here are Kevin Porter Jr. and Bobby Portis.
I think I would be there with you. Gary Trent Jr. for sure. Bobby Portis is one where, again, the relationship.
Wait, Gary Trent Jr., you think?
Oh, yeah. You said Kevin Porter Jr.
Yeah.
My fault. Yeah, I could see Kevin Porter Jr. Gary Trent Jr. is the tricky one because of what his market might be.
I don't think he won't be here. I just think the chances are much greater that those 2 will be here. I think there's a good chance, just because, to finish the point and let you get back to yours, as Frank and I said, like, you don't go from a veteran minimum to a huge payday. I mean, Malik Beasley doubled his salary, but you can easily do that if he wants to be here. And that's the other thing of yesterday's show when we talked about, well, what if you trade Damian Lillard's contract and attach that first round pick? Well, part of what brought Gary Trent Jr. here was Damian Lillard. So I think that's the other complicated part.
I mean, and also could be a situation of just the role that he's going to have here, because Gary Trent Jr.
You're going to start next year. He
was penciled in to start, got off to a slow start. We know he had the back injury, ended up being a bench guy, and for the Bucks was like a super sub for them. As the season went on, roles changed. His usage became, we need you to pretty much open and close these games. I mean, he became a key rotational piece that way. So I do think for Gary Trent Jr. and coming back to the Milwaukee Bucks, I would think that also part of it would be like, I'm the starting shooting guard this upcoming year. There's no putting me on the bench this year. Even if I get off to a slow start, like, I am the starting shooting guard for this team going forward, and we deal with everything else after that. And I think the playing time is going to be a big piece for him, but there's going to be a lot of opportunity for that to happen, especially with the Damian Lillard injury. So if playing time is part of it and the role, I think Gary Trent Jr. could come back to Milwaukee expecting an even bigger role than the one that he had last season.
Yeah. He's the most intriguing one, obviously, when you look at the age and the importance that he has. As ideally you're starting 2 guard. And it's not to say that a guy like AJ can't fill that, but I would love to have both of those guys to play as shooters playing off of Giannis. So that's where they're at. Those are the things that they have at their disposal in terms of the non-taxpayer mid-level, the potential, although I think it's very doubtful, the biannual exception, and a couple of other things that make things interesting. It all goes back to February 6th, February 8th, whenever the trade deadline was, and how much things changed that day. Even if what we saw on the floor did not work out, that trade was still largely a positive for the Bucks for reasons we'll explain coming up after this. If you're running a business, you know that every missed call is money left on the table. Think about the last time you had an urgent need, maybe for a plumber or some type of service provider. If the first person didn't answer, none of us wait. You probably never will. You move on to the next. And that's why you need Open Phone. Open Phone is the #1 business phone system built to streamline and scale your customer communications, all from an app on your phone or computer. It lets you manage business calls and texts from a single app, and you can jump into any call and conversation instantly without missing a beat. You or your team can jump right in there. Their AI agent handles after-hours calls, answers common questions, and captures leads so you never miss a customer. Open Phone is offering our listeners 20% off for your first 6 months at openphone.com/lockedonnba. That is openphone.com/lockedonnba. And if you have existing numbers with another service, Open Phone will port them over at no extra charge. Open Phone, no missed calls, no missed customers. All right, so the other things that the Bucks now have, they have a trade exception, which they created in that deal, sending Chris Middleton to the Wizards and bringing back a lesser salary in Kyle Kuzma, $7.2 million that was created in a trade exception. So again, you can use that to trade for a player or sign a player. You can now use your trade exceptions as basically a mid-level exception. You could sign a player for $7.2 million with that exception. You could trade a player for that figure. You could, trade, let's say, a $20 million contract and take back $28 million with that exception. So that opened up one more avenue for the Bucks. It also meant they can aggregate contracts in a trade because they are no longer a second apron team. It means they can acquire a player in a sign and trade because, again, they got out of the second apron. Now, that does hard cap you at the first apron. As just doing the quick math in my head, I think the first apron is $195 million. So you're looking at about $70 million you got to play with there with the rest of your roster, assuming those 4 guys are there that are under contract. But it just opens those things up for the Bucks, and you can take back more money in contracts than what you send out in a trade. Those last 4 that we just went through now, none of those are possible without the trade that sent Chris Middleton to the Wizards. Even that non-taxpayer mid-level, obviously, is not possible without that. The biannual is not possible without that. You are just in the same spot of, we can only sign guys to veteran minimums. I know Chris Middleton would be an expiring contract, but you're stuck in the same spot of all we have are veteran minimum contracts, and all we have is one asset to attach to this. Oh, by the way, you got a second-round pick in that deal too. All you have is that 2031 first or the 2030. You don't even have the 2032 first. It's frozen. So all you have is the 2031 first-round pick to attach to a contract to get under the second apron and then give guys veteran minimums.
I mean, here's the thing too. Shout out to Kyle Kuzma, because even with the trade, he reduced his trade bonus in that situation to help make sure that the Bucks remained under that second apron. So shout out to Kyle Kuzma for that aspect of it as well, for him just taking a little bit off. Be careful
heaping praise on him, Camille. I know what the comments are going to say.
But I mean, it opens things up, and I think we should be clear in saying, like, we're saying the Bucks have more options this year than what they would have had they kept Chris Middleton and remained a second apron team. But we're not also saying like the Bucks can do whatever they want. Like, it's still they're still working with a tight situation here when it comes to the financials, but they have more flexibility than what they would have had prior to. So like, even though on the court things necessarily go the way that we thought that it would with that Kuzma trade, it opened up things for the Bucks to be able to do this offseason to help improve the team. And also, I think it led us along the way to figuring out what makes sense for this team going forward? What is the best type of player group to have around Giannis? Because again, the Kyle Kuzma thing did not work. It'll be interesting to see what his status is for the team come this summer. I know he's going to be a name that's thrown out a lot in trade conversation.
He's
as
the new
well.
Pat Connaughton.
Oh yeah. Yeah, he definitely is. And Pat Connaughton might have some more saving grace now to that 43-point regular season finale. But for Kuz, like, again, did not work out well. But I do wonder, you heard Doc mention the fact of like, we didn't use him the best. Like, we have to do better job at that. What would that look like if Kyle Kuzma is on the Milwaukee Bucks roster next year?
So let me ask you what that would look like. Do you think that's what we saw the last, 2 games where the lineup changed?
With him coming off the bench?
Yeah.
I think so. I think that's probably the way you do it, because it seems to me from what we've seen, he likes to play a lot like Giannis likes to play. I'm not saying that he's necessarily at the same level of Giannis and executing it, but he likes to play in that same way, the type of lanes he likes to have, being able to drive, being able to have the ball in his hand. So if that is the role that he likes to have and he's most effective in, bringing him off the bench allows him to facilitate that against second units, which could be a strength for the Bucks. And we did see from him, not like lockdown defense, but just some versatility with him being a longer defender. You can throw out some interesting looks. So like, I think that there is a way for Kyle Kuzma to be useful. I just don't think that comes in the starting lineup for the Milwaukee Bucks.
Yeah, I don't think it's next to Giannis. That's not optimizing him or Giannis. And again, like, I am not trying to say the Bucks won that trade with the Wizards because of this, but I think the big thing to take from it is, look, it's still TBD on who wins this, because quite frankly, we have to see Chris Middleton bounce back. Like, as much as Kyle Kuzma disappointed, and Doc himself said it wasn't the version we needed from him. We got to put him in a better spot, as you just mentioned. There were just as many questions with Chris Middleton. Now, do you trust him more, especially offensively in the playoffs? Absolutely, especially coming off of what we saw in that series last year against the Indiana Pacers. But that's a big if. It's a big leap to say, I trust that he's going to be on the floor and going to be available for those, and that he's going to hold up in those spots, because that's not what we saw throughout the course of this regular season. And Chris himself acknowledged they needed me to be at a place that I wasn't at, as of this moment, that I needed a little more time, and they didn't have time. So in that sense, I understand the move. But the bigger point is, look, I hesitate to get too hyperbolic here, but without that trade, you may well be screwed, especially if you tell me, there's no sliding doors here. Like, Damian Lillard still ruptures his Achilles. You're probably screwed, because you have that $54 million contract from a player that's not going to play. You got Chris under contract for 1 more year. Who knows at that point what he's going to be looking like down the stretch. And you're still a second apron team. You don't have that additional pick to be able to trade. You can't do anything other than veteran minimums. And at that point, I would be really concerned of, is Giannis going to look around and say there is literally no path to not even compete for a championship, but to be like where we were this year? I don't see the path.
Yeah, and again, I mentioned it earlier. I don't know, it was this week, last week. Time is starting to mesh together with the Bucks offseason already. But I do wonder too if this upcoming year is a setup year for the 27 season, where it's like, okay, like, we're not saying we're punting this season at all, but we're going to align these contracts up in a way where we're trying to create more cap space come next offseason. And then we really do plan in that offseason to try to put something together that's no longer a team just fighting to be, 5 through 7, but rather like a team we could see being top 4 in the East. So again, that's future forecasting. I'm not saying that's exactly what's happening, but when the numbers start rolling in for free agency for the Bucks and the contracts that guys are getting, I'm going to be interested to see how that aligns with just the calendar and contracts, and like what that does for them also next offseason, when you expect another cap bump to the salary cap and going forward from there. But for this offseason, I'm thankful that the Bucks have some flexibility to do some things for this roster. You don't want to be like the Phoenix Suns. Like, they have a few more draft assets on their side, but when you look at the actual salary cap, the roster that they're trying to remake to be a playoff team, they're in a very difficult situation going forward, and the Bucks at least have some more flexibility than that.
Yeah, more flexibility, not to the level of other teams,
Right.
but you have some flexibility this summer, which you didn't have without that trade. So it is going to be a very interesting offseason here. We are going to get very heavy into the minutia of the cap and thoughts from Frank too about that same group that we went through and who's most likely to be here. What are some of the things the Bucks can do? Some of the things that we just ran through. So we'll get those thoughts from Frank Madden probably next week. We are going to check in with him on tomorrow's show and finally let the people get Frank's take on the season as a whole and especially the close to the season. So you have that to look forward to on the show tomorrow. But leave your thoughts in the comments. Who is most likely to be retained by the Bucks, and how different do you think this group looks next season? And we'll bring some of those questions and comments up to Frank on these next couple of shows as well. That'll do it for today's show. For Camille, I'm Justin. We will talk with you guys once again tomorrow on Locked On Bucks.